Hello, I'm glad you can join me for another devotional on the book of James. My name is Damian Barber, and I'm the minister at the Dean Road Church of Christ. Today we're going to be looking at a couple concepts from James chapter 4. The first one being James chapter 4, verses 13 through 16. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Now, the first question I want to ask of this text is, do we have to say, Lord willing, before everything we plan to do? I know there are some people who really go hardcore in saying this every time they kind of make plans. They say, well, Lord willing, I'll do this. I know there's the old saying, Lord willing, the creek don't rise. And then there's the counter, that one that I've even heard, well, if the Lord is willing, then the creek won't rise. But do we really have to say, Lord willing, before we mention our plans? What is the point that James is trying to make here? And really the point he's trying to make here is to remember that our lives are very short and we are not in control. God is in control. And so what does it mean to give control of our life over to God? It means that we should anticipate that maybe our plans aren't what's going to happen. Maybe it's to realize that if God doesn't want something to happen, then it won't happen. And this for the best if it doesn't work out the way we want it to. And so we realize that in our minds, at the very least, we realize that if these plans are only going to come to fruition if God allows them to come to fruition. And so I don't necessarily think that we need to say Lord willing before every time that we make plans or say our plans out loud, but we need to have in our mind this concept of maybe my plans won't work out, maybe God has a different plan, and so things will go a different direction than I want them to. We should always consider the will of God in our decisions. In fact, we should pray for God's will to be done, and even if it's different from what our will is, that we made apparent and that the things will work out the way God intends them to, not necessarily just the way we want to. Maybe even praying that we'll be okay if things don't work out the way that we plan. But to say that we always have to say Lord willing before everything we talk about that's in the future tense, I don't think that necessarily is what James is getting at here, but rather don't have the arrogance to assume that what I plan is going to come to pass. And realize that our lives are short and that God is the one that's in control. I want to look at one last verse here. James 4:17 also has kind of a small little snippet of information for us to process. It says, so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. You see, if we realize that something is right for us to do and we go against that, that's clearly sinful. That's going the wrong way. And to a certain degree, I would even say if we think something's wrong or we're not doing with the full faith that it's right to do, we ought not to do it. If there's that part of us that's thinking, oh, this might be wrong for me to do, go ahead and don't do that so that you're not going against your own conscience in that moment. And so we need to make sure that if we know what's right to do, that we do that. And if we know something that's wrong, that we stay away from that. And if we suspect something is wrong, let's try and figure out whether it's wrong or not. But for the meantime, let's make sure that we don't go over that line, don't cross into doing the thing that we suspect to be wrong, just so that we can have that clean conscience and that we don't find ourselves committing sin. And that kind of relates back to what James just had to say about making those plans without putting God into our plans, without realizing that they may not come out the way we want them to, and realizing that's okay. It's also going to point to what we're going to look at next week in James chapter 5, where it talks about the rich oppressing those who are poor and not taking care of the poor and not doing what they know they ought to do, and instead doing the very thing they ought not to do. And so I hope you'll join me next week as we look at James chapter 5, verses 1 through 6 along those lines. As always, I hope you've gotten something from this lesson, and I will catch you in the next one. God bless you.